My family used my name like currency. Funny how quiet it got when I took it back. So last Saturday, I was standing in the backyard of a country club my family could barely afford, holding a paper plate while everyone else ate off porcelain. My brother handed it to me himself, a flimsy white circle trembling in the wind, and said, "Sorry, Claire, we ran out of seats under the tent." He didn't even look at me when he said it. He just turned back to the glowing lights and laughter like I was some kind of background noise. For a second, I actually laughed, because it felt like a joke. Like any moment now he'd wink and say, "Relax, your family." But no, Lauren, his fiancée, just brushed invisible dust off her silk dress and said, "We're trying to keep the aesthetic consistent." Then she smiled the kind of smile rich women wear when they're pretending not to notice the poor relation. Here's the thing, I'm not poor, I'm a damn accountant. I paid for half that tent, the champagne, even the eucalyptus garlands curling around the poles, my card. So yeah, standing there with that paper plate, I wasn't broke, just broken. The air smelled like garlic butter and wet grass. Inside the tent, music floated like laughter from another planet. My mom waved from a distance, pretending not to notice the setup. My dad avoided eye contact entirely, and I just stood there, one heel sinking into the mud, thinking about every Venmo request labeled urgent family thing I'd ever paid. It hit me then. I'd built this wedding like a ghost contractor. The venue deposit, the caterer's favor, the photographer's retainer. Each payment was a piece of me they took without asking. And now I was literally outside, disposable, biodegradable, like the plate in my hand. I wish I could say I made a scene. Threw the plate, yelled, something cinematic, but I didn't. I just looked at it, thin, trembling, and thought, this is what I am to them, useful, then discarded. So I walked over to the gift table, slipped my little envelope out from under the pile. A bridesmaid gasped like I'd pulled a fire alarm. "I'm just taking back what's mine," I said quietly. Then I opened the card, pulled out the check, and tore it in half. Then again. 8 perfect little pieces falling into the trash like snow. The whole lawn went silent. Even the DJ hesitated mid-track. My brother's best man muttered, "What the hell's her problem?" I almost told him. I almost listed the invoices still sitting in my email, the receipts in my glove compartment. But instead I just smiled, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes, and said, "Financial ghosts don't bring gifts." Then I set the paper plate neatly on a cocktail table and walked away. By the time I reached my car, my phone was lighting up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls from my mom, texts from my dad. "Be reasonable." My brother's message was just one line. "You embarrassed us." Embarrassed them? That's funny. They'd erased me from the photos, from the seating chart, from the tent, but apparently I still had the power to humiliate them. Driving home, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry, just hollow. Like the quiet after a storm, when you realize your house is still standing, but something inside it isn't. When I got home, I kicked off my shoes, opened a window, and let the cold air in. My apartment smelled like laundry and lemon oil. Honest smells, earned smells. And for the first time that day, I felt real. That's when I knew I wasn't going to be their silent sponsor anymore. I was done funding love that came with a receipt. And somewhere between the hum of my fridge and the buzzing of my phone, I whispered to myself. They handed me a paper plate. I'm about to hand them a mirror. They thought I'd disappear after that wedding. That I'd go home, cry into a glass of cheap wine, and move on like I always did. They didn't know accountants have long memories. We keep receipts, literally and emotionally. So that night, I sat on my couch in sweatpants, surrounded by silence and unpaid gratitude, and opened my laptop. It wasn't revenge, it was math. The first thing I saw was our shared wedding budget spreadsheet. Still open, still public. I clicked through tabs labeled Decor, Vendors, Guest List. Each one had little notes in Lauren's bubbly handwriting. Under Miscellaneous, there it was, Claire Finance Backup. Like I was an emergency fund with legs. I scrolled further and found a tab called Exclusions. My stomach dropped when I saw my name next to a note that read, "Not a good fit for vibe. Keep outside main tent." I stared at that sentence for a full minute, trying to decide if I was angry or just numb. Turns out I was both. I started tracing payments. $2,150 to the caterer, $1,100 to the florist, $600 to a company called Photo Bloom Events. My name was on every single one of them. Each transaction was a quiet betrayal wrapped in thanks, sis. I dug deeper and found something worse. A credit application I didn't remember signing. Co-signer, Claire Dawson. My father's name right next to mine. That's when I remembered a conversation from months earlier. He'd called saying he needed me to review some small business paperwork. Something about refinancing his truck for a side job. I'd signed a few electronic forms without thinking, because that's what good daughters do, right? We help, we don't question, but now, staring at that document, I realized he'd used my credit to open a business line, in my name. I felt my pulse in my throat. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, I just whispered, "You've got to be kidding me." Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and titled it, Ghost Accounting. For the next 3 days, I became a forensic investigator. I pulled every statement, every Venmo note, every thanks text. I color-coded them by person. My mother's reimbursement for venue, blue. My brother's emergency tux deposit, red. Lauren's oops, cake vendor changed, pink. It looked like a rainbow of manipulation. At some point, I realized I hadn't eaten in 10 hours. I ordered Thai food and kept working. While scrolling through my emails, I found one from my mom sent weeks ago. "Honey, could you forward the last payment to the planner? I'll Venmo you later." She never did. The message ended with a heart emoji, which somehow made it worse. The next morning, I called the credit union. The woman on the phone was kind, too kind, which is how you know you're screwed. She said, "Miss Dawson, you're listed as primary on this business account. There's been consistent activity for over a year. My dad's construction company, the one he bragged about starting from scratch, was built on my name." I hung up and sat there, frozen, every memory of him saying, "You're the responsible one, Claire," replayed in my head. I used to take that as pride. Now it sounded like strategy. By the afternoon, I decided to call someone who'd actually respect the numbers, Jack Nolan, a lawyer I met during tax season at the firm. He'd once told me over coffee, "People hide behind love to justify theft." I didn't understand it then. I did now. He picked up on the second ring. "Claire, you okay?" "Define okay," I said, trying to laugh but failing. He listened as I told him everything. The wedding, the fake cosign, the paper plate. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "All right, you've got 2 options. You can confront them emotionally, which they'll twist, or legally, which they can't." "I'm tired of crying," I said. "Let's go with the second one." Jack asked for documentation. I sent him everything, 46 PDFs, 32 screenshots, and a spreadsheet labeled Family Fraud. He called me back 10 minutes later, half impressed, half concerned. "You're terrifyingly organized," he said. "Occupational hazard," I replied. That night, my best friend Tara stopped by with her usual mix of sarcasm and snacks. "So you're like Batman but with spreadsheets?" she joked. I smiled for the first time in days. "More like ghost accountant," I said. "I haunt people with receipts." We sat there drinking boxed wine, her making jokes, me sorting evidence. But at one point she grew quiet. "You know they're going to spin this, right? Make you the villain?" I nodded. "They already did, I just didn't read the script until now." The next morning, I drove by my parents' house. The lawn looked perfect, the porch light still on even in daylight. My dad's obsession. I parked across the street, watching him carry boxes from his truck. For a second, I almost got out. Almost asked why. But then I remembered the credit application, the fake signature, the way he said responsible one. And I realized he knew exactly what he was doing. Back home, I drafted an email. Subject line, formal notice of financial audit. It wasn't dramatic, just factual. Dates, transactions, documents attached. I CC'd everyone involved. When I hit send, I felt the strangest calm, like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally exhaled. That night, my phone started buzzing. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. My mother. "Sweetheart, what's all this about? We can talk." My brother. "You're ruining everything." Lauren. "Can we please not do this before the honeymoon?" I muted all of them. I made myself a cup of tea, sat on my porch, and listened to the crickets. There's something oddly peaceful about knowing you're done being the family wallet. It's not revenge, it's closure. Still, a part of me ached. I thought about birthdays, holidays, the sound of my dad's laugh before it all turned transactional. But the other part, the one that had swallowed humiliation under a white tent, whispered, "They built this. I'm just showing them the bill." Before I went to bed, I opened that spreadsheet one more time and changed the title. It no longer said family wedding budget. It now read, Evidence, Phase 1. Then I smiled to myself and said out loud, You wanted an aesthetic wedding, Evan? Let's make it a financial crime scene instead. And with that, I hit save. You ever have one of those moments where you're so calm it scares you? Like your brain's gone full corporate, emotion outsourced, logic in charge? That was me 2 weeks later, sitting in my car outside the same damn country club, watching people in pastel dresses take selfies under a Welcome to Forever banner. The irony? The lease for that banner was under my name. They'd rebooked everything after the little misunderstanding, as my mom called it. Apparently, embarrassment was fixable with floral upgrades and family healing. My phone had buzzed all week with her messages. Please come, honey, let's just make peace. Peace. That's what she called unpaid debt and emotional blackmail. But I said yes, because I wanted to end it properly. Not with tears this time, but with paperwork. Jack, my lawyer/guardian angel, was beside me in the passenger seat, flipping through a folder thicker than the wedding cake. You sure about this? He asked. Yep, I said. They built this wedding on my credit. It's only fair I shut it down on my terms. He grinned. You've got a flair for drama, Dawson. Please, I said, I'm just here for the math. The ceremony hadn't started yet when I walked in. Heads turned. Whispering spread like wildfire. I could almost hear their thoughts. She actually showed up. I wore black. Not out of pettiness, but practicality. It hides coffee stains and disappointment. Evan, my brother, spotted me first. He looked annoyed. Not scared yet, just inconvenienced. Claire, he said through his clenched jaw, let's not make a scene, okay? Funny, I said. That's what you said last time. And yet here we are. Same scene, new budget. He didn't get it. None of them did. They thought my silence was surrender. They mistook restraint for weakness. Classic family math error. I walked past him and found the event coordinator, a nervous woman named Kelly, juggling clipboards. Hi, Kelly, I said. Quick question. Who signed the payment authorization for the venue? That would be, she checked her sheet, Claire Dawson. Right, I said. That's me, and I'm revoking it, effective immediately. You could hear the gears stop turning. She blinked. I don't think I can. Oh, you can, Jack said, stepping forward, flashing his legal ID. She's the sole financial sponsor on all major contracts. This event cannot legally continue using her funds without consent. 10 minutes later, the caterer stopped serving. Then the DJ unplugged his board. The florist froze mid-setup. One by one, the moving parts of my brother's perfect day began to stall like a car out of gas. Evan came running. What the hell are you doing? He shouted. Turning off the faucet, I said. You were thirsty, but the well was mine. You're ruining this, he yelled, face red. No, Evan, I said calmly. I already paid for this show once. I'm just canceling the encore. My mother arrived then, clutching her pearls like a bad TV character. Sweetheart, can we please talk about this privately? We can, I said, after you explain why my social security number is on your business credit line. Her face drained of color. She glanced at my father, who was standing near the bar, pretending to be fascinated by the ice sculpture. Jack opened the folder, laying out the documents like a magic trick. Here's your loan. Here's your forged co-signature. Here's the recorded conversation between you two last month. And then, because poetic justice has impeccable timing, I pulled out my phone and hit play. My dad's voice filled the speakers. She's useful as long as she keeps paying. Just don't let her feel too important. The silence that followed was biblical. Lauren, the bride, whispered, "Oh my God," and stepped away from Evan. Her friends looked mortified. The guests shifted uncomfortably, realizing they were witnessing the implosion of a family in real time. Evan's mouth opened, closed, opened again. That's taken out of context. Sure, I said, context being, you needed my money. You could have just talked to us. Talked? I laughed. I tried talking when you handed me a paper plate, remember? You didn't want to listen, so now you get the presentation version. Jack began collecting signatures, calmly informing each vendor that payment authorization was revoked. A delivery guy rolled away a tower of champagne crates, while the DJ muttered something about not getting sued. I turned to my parents. You taught me to be responsible, to clean up my messes. Well, this one's yours. My dad finally spoke, his voice low. You're ungrateful, Claire, after all we've done for you. That made me laugh out loud, the kind that hurts. Ungrateful? You used my credit, my savings, my name, and I'm the ungrateful one? You should be thanking me for not pressing charges. Yet. Someone from the crowd, I think it was Aunt June, muttered, Well, this is going to be on Facebook. Lauren started crying. Not because of love, but because she realized the open bar was gone. Evan, she whispered, this is humiliating. He snapped. You think I planned this? Kind of looks like you did, I said. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out 3 small white boxes. Before I go, I brought something. I placed them on the table. Box 1, invoices. Box 2, canceled contracts. Box 3, copies of every check I ever wrote for this family. Consider them wedding favors. I looked around one last time. At the half-decorated tent, the guests whispering, the perfect illusion unraveling thread by thread. You wanted an aesthetic wedding, I said softly. Now you've got performance art. And with that, I turned to leave. Behind me, chaos erupted. My mother crying, my brother shouting, my dad demanding someone fix this. But I kept walking. The sound of my heels against the pavement was steady, sharp, liberating. Jack caught up to me near the parking lot. You okay? He asked. Better than I've ever been, I said, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. You know, I used to think family meant unconditional love. And now I think it just means conditional loans. He laughed, a short, knowing laugh, then handed me a coffee from his car. You handled that like a CEO in a hostage negotiation. Technically, I said, taking a sip, I was both. We watched from a distance as the tent lights flickered off one by one. Vendors packed up, guests drifted away, and somewhere in that mess, my brother's voice rose, angry, helpless, human. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt clean. As we drove away, I looked back at the fading glow of the venue. You know what's funny, I said. They always told me I was too quiet. Turns out, silence is loud when it's attached to their bank account. Jack just nodded. You didn't burn the bridge, Claire, he said. You repossessed it. And I smiled because he was right. Sometimes justice doesn't need a courtroom. It just needs a calculator, a lawyer, and one woman who finally says, enough. 3 days after the wedding fiasco, I woke up to find my phone vibrating off the nightstand like it was possessed. Missed calls, unknown numbers, a couple of text messages that said, you monster, and one that said, you legend. That last one made me smile. Turns out someone had filmed the whole thing. The moment I revoked the contracts, the audio clip of my dad's voice, everything, and posted it on TikTok. By noon, it had hit 1 million views. The caption read, when your family uses your credit to pay for their wedding, and you pull the plug. I didn't post it, obviously. But the internet doesn't need your permission to make a point. Within hours, people were calling it the Dawson debacle. Some were laughing, others were furious, but almost everyone agreed on one thing. I wasn't the villain. I was the accountant who finally balanced the books. My brother, though? He called me at least 20 times that day. I didn't answer until the next morning. He didn't even say hello, just started yelling. Do you have any idea what you did? I lost my job because of you. I let him talk, just listening to the sound of panic in his voice. When he ran out of breath, I said, you lost your job because you used my name to get a loan, Evan. The company checked. I didn't ruin your life. You did. He went quiet for a second, then said, you're dead to this family. I laughed. I've been a ghost for years. You just never noticed until I stopped paying rent on the haunting. Then I hung up. By that weekend, my parents' business, the little construction company my dad bragged about, was under investigation. Jack had filed all the documentation, and the state was very interested in how a line of credit tied to my name ended up funding both family expenses and event costs. They froze the accounts. My mother left me a voicemail crying about how we could have worked it out privately. I saved it, just in case. But here's the thing. I didn't feel good about it. I wasn't dancing in the living room or popping champagne. I felt hollow, like I'd won a war I never wanted to fight. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer, watching the sun go down, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. Done being their emergency fund, their emotional crutch, their excuse. Tara came over. She always shows up when the world catches fire. So Ghost Accountant went viral, she said, plopping down next to me. Apparently, I said, I'm a meme now. She grinned. Not just a meme, a movement. People are making duets talking about financial abuse in families. You basically started an online support group without trying. I blinked. Seriously? Dead serious, she said, scrolling through her phone. Look, there's even a hashtag. #no more tables. Someone said you inspired them to finally say no to their brother who keeps using her credit card. That's when it hit me. Maybe something good could come out of all this. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I posted my side of the story. No theatrics, no filters. Just a 5-minute video titled, "They used my name. Here are the receipts." I laid it all out. The loans, the forged signature, the fake kindness. Not to shame them, but to warn others like me. By the next morning, it had over 2 million views. Comments flooded in. I felt this in my bones. She's not cold, she's just done. This is why you keep receipts, literally. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the quiet daughter or the backup plan. I was a story that mattered. A week later, Jack and I met at a diner to review the last of the paperwork. "You know," he said between bites of pie, "you could sue for damages." I shook my head. "I think they've already paid enough. Besides, I'm not looking for money. I just want my name back." He nodded. "Then you've already won." On the way home, I stopped by the old community center where I used to tutor kids in math. The director, an older woman named Mrs. Harris, gave me a hug and said, "Saw your video, dear. You made us proud." Then she added, "You should start something with this. Help people who don't even know they're being used." That night, I created a website, nomoretables.org, a place for people to share their own financial abuse stories and find legal resources. I wrote the tagline myself, "You're not ungrateful for protecting your peace." Within a week, over 100 people had submitted their stories. One woman wrote, "You helped me cut off my mom's access to my bank account. I finally feel free." That message broke me, in the best way. Meanwhile, my family went dark. My parents deleted their social media. Evan moved out of state. Lauren, I heard, annulled the marriage 2 weeks after the incident. No surprise there. Love built on fraud doesn't age well. But here's the plot twist. Not everyone hated me. A few relatives reached out quietly, saying they admired what I did, but were too afraid to say it publicly. One cousin even wrote, "You did what the rest of us never had the guts to do." It wasn't approval I was looking for, but it was something like peace. Still, some nights, I'd wake up thinking about it all. The laughter under that tent, the smell of champagne and eucalyptus, the sound of paper tearing in my hands. I wondered if I could have handled it differently, maybe softer, maybe quieter. But then I'd remember my dad's voice on that recording, and I'd know, no, this was the only way it could have ended. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like boundaries. And maybe the most radical thing you can do in a family built on guilt is to say, no more. So yeah, the internet might remember me as the girl who crashed her brother's wedding, but I remember it differently. I remember it as the day I stopped funding my own erasure. And as I watched the donations roll in for the foundation, I realized something beautiful. People didn't just want to watch justice happen. They wanted to learn from it. To stand up for themselves, too. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and whispered. Guess the ghost finally found her voice. Then, for the first time in a long time, I slept without checking my bank account or my conscience. It's been 6 months since the wedding that never really happened. The world, thankfully, moved on. TikTok found a new scandal to chew on. My family faded into quiet anonymity, and I learned that peace doesn't come with fireworks. It's just quiet mornings, good coffee, and not having to double-check your bank statements for betrayal. I live by the coast now. Small town, one grocery store, the kind where people still wave at you even if they don't know your name. I rent a little cottage with blue shutters that creak in the wind. Every morning, I walk to the pier with my mug and watch the fishermen pull in their nets while the sun climbs over the water. It sounds cinematic, I know, but it's not. It's just stillness, and that stillness feels earned. Sometimes people from the No More Tables community message me asking if I ever miss them, my family, the chaos, the noise. I tell them the truth. Sometimes, but only like you miss a storm once it's passed. You remember the sound, but you don't want it back. One afternoon, while scrolling through emails, I saw one from an unknown sender. Subject line, "You should see this." It was a link to a local news article. Charles Dawson pleads guilty to financial fraud, sentenced to probation and restitution. My father's name. I just stared at the screen for a while. No tears, no satisfaction. Just closure. He'd finally been held accountable, not by me this time, but by the same system he thought he could game. That night, I walked along the beach until the sand turned cold under my feet. I thought about him, about how every "I'm proud of you" had been a transaction, how every smile came with a receipt. And I realized something. I'd spent half my life trying to earn love that was always conditional. The moment I stopped paying for it, I got my life back. A few weeks later, I got a call from Tara. "You've been invited to speak at a finance conference in Chicago," she said. "They want you to talk about family financial boundaries." I laughed. "Me? At a finance conference? You know I almost failed macroeconomics, right?" "Yeah," she said, "but you aced surviving it." So I went. I stood on stage in front of hundreds of people and told them my story. Not the viral version, but the real one. The one where you wake up at 3 a.m., replaying every red flag you ignored. The one where family feels like a debt you'll never pay off. And when I finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood silent until one woman said, "Thank you." Then everyone joined in. After the talk, people lined up to hug me, to share their own stories. Brothers who drained savings, mothers who forged signatures, spouses who treated love like leverage. And in every voice, I heard a little bit of myself. That night, I finally understood what peace really meant. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of self-respect. A few days after that, my mom called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me, curiosity, maybe forgiveness, made me pick up. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Your father's not well," she said. "He keeps asking if you'll visit." I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry he's sick," I said quietly. "So you'll come?" she asked, hopeful. "No," I said. "I forgave him, Mom. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what I had to survive to get here." There was silence. Then she whispered, "I don't know how to live without all this anger." "Try peace," I said. "It's quieter, but it lasts longer." And that was the last time we spoke. When I got back home, the sunset was spilling gold through the kitchen window. On the counter sat a stack of letters from people who'd found no more tables. One woman wrote, "Your story saved my credit score, and maybe my sanity." Another said, "You helped me see that saying no isn't selfish, it's sacred." I read every word, then placed them in a box labeled Proof of Life. That night, as I sat on the porch with a blanket and a cup of tea, I thought about all of it. The humiliation, the courtroom, the viral chaos, the aftermath. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the ghost accountant anymore. I felt like a survivor who'd balanced more than numbers. I'd balanced my own worth. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a wedding band was playing by the water. A piano, soft and slow. I didn't flinch this time. I just listened. Then my phone buzzed. Tara, of course. "You alive?" "Barely," I texted back, but in a good way. She replied with a single line. "Told you, ghosts don't haunt when they've made peace." I laughed out loud, alone on that porch. She was right. I wasn't haunting anyone anymore. I was just living. So here's the truth I wish someone had told me years ago. Sometimes the loudest revenge is silence. Sometimes the real comeback isn't destroying them. It's rebuilding yourself so completely they can't even recognize what they broke. And sometimes peace isn't quiet at all. It hums, it fills every inch of your new life until you don't even remember the sound of the old one. That's where I am now. Still on the coast, still drinking too much coffee, still human but free. And if anyone ever asks me what happened to the girl who brought down her brother's wedding, I'll just smile and say, she stopped paying for her family's lies and started investing in her own peace. You know, looking back now, I realize this story was never really about revenge. It was about reclamation, about taking back the parts of yourself that other people borrowed, used, or broke, and saying, no more. For the longest time, I thought love meant sacrifice, that family meant debt. But love without respect isn't love, it's leverage. And respect only grows when you stop apologizing for setting boundaries. It's funny how life works. Sometimes losing people feels like losing everything until you finally breathe and realize it was just space clearing itself for peace to move in. They say, what goes around comes around. And I guess they're right. But I've learned it's not about karma punishing them. It's about life rewarding you for choosing yourself, for walking away from noise and standing in your own quiet truth. Healing doesn't look like victory. Sometimes it just looks like sleeping through the night without feeling guilty for surviving. So if you're listening to this and you're carrying the weight of someone else's expectations, drop it. You don't owe anyone your peace to prove your worth. Let go, rebuild, and remember. Real strength isn't loud, it's steady. They finally apologized weeks later. I forgave them, but this time on my terms. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from someone who kept taking more than they gave? Share your story in the comments, or tell me what lesson this one left you with. Don't forget to like the video if it hit home, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Because trust me, every ending has a new beginning waiting behind it. Until next time, take care of your peace, and may your quiet be soft, steady, and truly yours.